Syracuse is once again an underdog on Saturday. Here's how they can upset the Duke Blue Devils.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. Thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're watching Locked On Syracuse right now on YouTube or you're listening to Locked On Syracuse on your favorite audio platform. On today's show, Syracuse football, according to our friends over at FanDuel, has the Orange as 5.5-point underdogs to Duke on Saturday at noon Eastern. I'd imagine it's because of the uncertainty at the quarterback position for Syracuse, Rickie Collins making his first career start. Here's how Syracuse can upset Duke on Saturday at home. They need to make big defensive plays and take advantage of moments. We'll discuss more about that later on in the show. Plus, Dan Villari needs to be Rickie Collins' best friend early and often on Saturday. But first and foremost, for Syracuse football to upset the Duke Blue Devils on Saturday, the biggest key by far is establishing a running game. All that and more here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. Now, before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. So Syracuse football, as we have already talked about here on this show, has a quarterback in Rickie Collins making his first career collegiate start on Saturday against Duke. Now, fortunately for Syracuse, this is not the first time that Rickie Collins will be playing any sort of game action. In fact, we saw him fill in for a little over a quarter last week against Clemson, played a little bit against Colgate, and did attempt 7 passes while he was at LSU. So he does have some experience, but this is his first collegiate start. Now, I'd imagine that Syracuse wants to make Rickie Collins' life as easy as possible. I don't think it's a good idea to ask Rickie Collins in his first ever start to go out and be a hero right away. I'll certainly take it. Trust me, if Rickie Collins goes out there, throws the ball 40, 50 times, maybe even 60 times, I don't know, has over 400 total yards and 4 touchdowns, doesn't turn the ball over. I mean, I think we'll throw a parade here on this podcast. We will have a Locked On Syracuse parade if that happens, because that means that Syracuse football would not miss a beat at that point at the quarterback position, meaning they could have an outstanding 2025 year. And who knows, that could happen one day, but for now, this Saturday, Syracuse football must establish a running game to upset the Duke Blue Devils. Think about how Syracuse came out against the Clemson Tigers last week. Let's go over some of the first few plays of that game. What did Syracuse do? First play, Yassine Willis, 4-yard rush. Then Yassine Willis broke a big one for a 32-yard gain. Then Will Nixon was subbed in. He got a 5-yard rush. Then Steve Angeli scrambled on his own for 8 yards, did end up getting banged up on the play, not to be confused with unfortunately suffering the season-ending injury in the third quarter. He was actually banged up in the first quarter as well, but did stay in the game. However, he did have to come out for a play. Rickie Collins came in, and he also ran for 2 yards. So the first 5 plays against Clemson by Syracuse were all runs. And think about what that did to Clemson, not just on that drive, but for the rest of the game. I mean, we can talk about the ending of that first drive against Clemson, because the next 2 plays, Jonte Cook, 17-yard catch, and then Justice Ross Simmons caught a 12-yard back shoulder touchdown to give Syracuse a 7-0 lead in the first quarter on the first drive. Once Clemson couldn't stop the run, game over. At least for their defense going up against the Syracuse offense, you knew that if they could not stop the Syracuse ground game, it was done. Because Syracuse, we knew at least up until that point, that they could throw the football pretty effectively against pretty much everyone. That includes even Tennessee back in week 1, where they were able to throw the football at a pretty decent rate. If you can't stop Syracuse on the ground, you're in trouble as a defense. And look, relating this to the Duke Blue Devils, Rickie Collins, we all have to admit, I'm optimistic about him. I do think that he is going to perform at a pretty high level, and we'll talk more about that on Friday here on this show on Poll Friday, expectations for the rest of 2025 with Rickie Collins. But he is a mystery box. We all, as Syracuse fans, have to accept that we truly don't know about Rickie Collins up until this point. And even though he has seen game action, I don't know if we've really gotten a fair assessment of Rickie Collins. He came out against Colgate, threw a brutal interception to start, and then he was pretty good from there, but it's also Colgate, and it's hard to get rid of that interception from your mind he threw in that one. And then against Clemson, he threw a touchdown to Justice Ross Simmons. It was a back shoulder throw. It was a great throw, great catch. But it gave Syracuse a 20-point lead, and from then on, it seemed like Syracuse football sort of had the training wheels on Rickie Collins, and for good reason. They asked him at that point, they're up by multiple scores. There's 1 quarter to go. Just play mistake-free football. And to his credit, he did play mistake-free football, but now he's actually starting a game from start to finish, right? So it's a little bit different. And I just don't think that asking Rickie Collins to be a hero right off the bat against Duke is a smart strategy for Syracuse football. Also worth mentioning that we talked about this yesterday. Duke's rushing defense, it's not exactly the best rushing defense in all of college football. They allow over 150 yards a game on the ground through the first 4 games of the season. That is towards the bottom of the ACC. Hollywood Smothers of NC State, he is a really good running back, by the way, but still, he had over 120 yards against Duke last week on over 7 yards a carry. And we've also gone over the multiple quarterbacks that have been able to run against this Duke defense in general. Now, what if they fall behind in this game, right? Because a lot of what I'm saying is important when it comes to, hey, Syracuse, you might want to get out to a good start, right? Look, getting off to a good start, no matter what the sport, I think no matter what is pretty important. But I also think it's a misnomer to say that every single game it's a key. You don't always have to get off to a good start to still do what you want to do and eventually win a game. So what do I mean by that? Would it be great if Syracuse came out just like they did against Clemson, go up 10-0 before Duke even touches the ball? Sure. Be outstanding if Syracuse can do something like that, right? But even if they fall behind in this game, do not abandon the run. Do not abandon the run, because you want to limit the amount of times that Rickie Collins is in a situation where the whole world knows that he has to throw, and we just have to see what happens. That's what I mean by make his life as easy as possible. Sure, there will be moments in this game where Rickie Collins is going to have to step up and make a play, but it's also on the team around him to step up and rally behind him as well. What do you think are the biggest keys for Syracuse to knock off Duke on Saturday, to pull off another upset, back-to-back weeks of upsets? Comment your thoughts in the comments section below. And do you agree with me that establishing the run is the number one key for Syracuse to beating Duke on Saturday? Comment in the comments section below. Now, coming up, when Syracuse decides to throw, Dan Villari has got to be the number one option. I'll tell you why next on Locked On Syracuse. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV. You can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we're about to discuss how Dan Villari needs to be the number one target for Syracuse early and often on Saturday against Duke. But before we do so, thank you all so much for the continued support here on Locked On Syracuse. I hope you enjoy the Locked On Syracuse podcast. And if so, if you can just do me a quick favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps Locked On Syracuse grow to reach all Syracuse Orange fans, and stick around later in the show for a special announcement regarding Locked On Syracuse. Spoiler alert, we're expanding a little bit on social media, so stick around later on in the show for more details. But back to the keys for Syracuse football on Saturday to once again win as an underdog. Okay? We just talked about how Syracuse needs to establish the run. But we all know that Syracuse eventually is going to need to throw the football with Rickie Collins. And I believe we've talked about this plenty, that Syracuse has a ton of weapons at its disposal. And they have proven that over the past year and 4 games, that they can also be pretty interchangeable. But with all the weapons at Syracuse disposal, there is one guy that needs more looks than anyone early and often, and that is tight end Dan Villari on Saturday against Duke. Dan Villari had a decent day versus Clemson. He had 4 catches for over 40 yards, and he was targeted 6 times. I would like Dan Villari to be targeted 6 times in the first quarter against Duke on Saturday. What I've loved about Dan Villari this season, and we've gone over the fact that he has progressed significantly in his final year here with Syracuse football, final year in college in general, out of eligibility, unfortunately, is the fact that he seems to always find himself wide open. He is the perfect security blanket for any quarterback that Syracuse trots out there, which on Saturday, the starter will be Rickie Collins. Think about it this way. Dan Villari has caught, 20 passes this season, right? If you go on College Reference, it says he caught 20 passes. I trust College Reference is right about that. So he's caught 20 passes this season. How many of those passes would you say were contested? Meaning there was a lot of traffic around him and he brought it in. Good for him, right? I feel like the answer is not many. Most of the time when Dan Villari catches a pass, there's really nobody near him. That's a credit to Dan Villari in his route running and his smarts in understanding where the defense is going to be pre-snap. It's also a credit to Jeff Nixon and his play calling and just the coaching in general in putting Dan Villari in a position to succeed and always finding himself wide open on some plays. So the fact that he is really seemingly always wide open and he's the perfect security blanket, don't you think that would be a pretty good way for Rickie Collins to open up the game on Saturday, looking for Dan Villari, his all reliable tight end, some quick, easy completions, get into a rhythm, get into a throw, or get into a rhythm. You get what I'm saying. Stumbling over my words here a little bit here on Locked On Syracuse. I'm not perfect, okay? I'm not perfect. I apologize, all right? But it's also layers, because the last segment, I said how Syracuse needs to establish the run. And now I'm saying the main passing target, especially early in the game, needs to be Dan Villari. How does this all tie together? Well, if you can establish a running game, and if you can find Dan Villari early and often, which, by the way, he averages about 12 yards a catch, but it doesn't necessarily need to be Dan Villari for 12 yards every time. If you can establish that short passing game with Villari and establish a running game, all of a sudden, what's Duke going to do? Inevitably, they're going to have to load the box. You're going to start seeing Duke at that point putting 7-8 guys in the box because they have to try to stop the Syracuse ground game with Yassine Willis and Will Nixon, maybe mix in some Jaden Hart there. They're going to have to figure out how to cover Dan Villari. What happens when Duke decides to crowd the box, load the box, if you will, right? What happens? That makes Rickie Collins' life so much easier, because those things layered together would open up one-on-one matchups for Justice Ross Simmons, for Jonte Cook, for Daryl Gill, for any of Syracuse's wide receivers who they have already shown this season they can win plenty of one-on-one coverage. By having Duke load the box to try to stop the run and stop Dan Villari, all of a sudden the intermediate to deep passing game becomes a lot easier to get going with a backup quarterback in Rickie Collins. And then from that point, it's up to Rickie Collins to be able to make those throws, but at least those wide receivers are facing one-on-one coverage. And I think we could trust that those receivers can win much more often than not in one-on-one coverage. But if Syracuse can't get Duke to load the box, meaning Duke could put maybe 5-6 guys in there, not much, and they could slow down Dan Villari, they could slow down the Syracuse ground attack, well, that makes Rickie Collins' life a lot harder. Now you could start saying, hey, if you're the Duke defense, who do you want to double on the outside? Do you want to double Jonte Cook? Do you want to double Justice Ross Simmons? What do you want to do? And all of a sudden, you're forcing Rickie Collins to throw into much tighter windows. So to sum up everything, really, the first two keys of the game, establishing the run and using Dan Villari early and often, you're trying to sucker the Duke defense in. And as a result, it opens up the intermediate to long-range passing game, and you're now not asking Rickie Collins to make tight window throws 15, 20 yards down the field. Those receivers are probably going to be open against this Duke defense. Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. Your keys for Syracuse football to upset Duke on Saturday. Coming up, we shift gears and talk about the Syracuse defense. Spoiler alert, I don't necessarily think they're going to stop the Duke offense, but they need to make big plays in order to win this game. I'll tell you more next here on Locked On Syracuse. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sunday. So are you ready to play over on FanDuel? Now's your chance. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. I'm going to say something that maybe sounds a little bit harsh, but all I can ask is that you bear with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Of course, we're talking about 3 keys for Syracuse football to upset the Duke Blue Devils. The first 2 keys were about the offense, establishing the run, utilizing Dan Villari. Now we're talking about the Syracuse defense. Look, I do not think that Syracuse will stop this Duke offense. And it's less so about the Syracuse defense and more so the respect I have for the Duke offense. We went over it yesterday. They have an elite quarterback in Darian Mensah. They have a trio of running backs, all capable of running the ball, and they have plenty of skill players on the outside. It's going to be very difficult for Syracuse to, quote unquote, stop the Duke offense. So I don't think it's fair to ask the Syracuse defense, hey, hold Duke under 300 total yards and 14 points, right? I don't think that's necessarily fair, but I'm here to tell you right now that it's okay. Syracuse can win this game even if they're not, quote unquote, stopping the Duke offense. They don't need to be what Miami did to the University of Florida last Saturday, where Florida it seemed like they couldn't even cross the line of scrimmage in that one. Again, let's go back to how Syracuse beat Clemson and talk about the defense. What if I told you that the Clemson Tigers gained over 500 total yards against this Syracuse defense? What if I told you that? What would you say? Well, I'm here to tell you right now that that is a fact, that Clemson had over 500 total yards against this Syracuse defense. But how was Syracuse able to hold Clemson to just 21 points? Well, here was the formula. They forced a couple of turnovers. Antoine Delorier, his punch out on Adam Randall late in the third quarter was enormous because that directly led to Rickie Collins throwing the touchdown to Justice Ross Simmons, which gave Syracuse a 20-point lead. Enormous point of that game. Shout out to Antoine Delorier, who is already one of the better linebackers in the entire country as a true freshman. Really scary to think about and really exciting to think about as well for Syracuse fans like myself and obviously you. The other turnover, Davian Kerr with an interception in the fourth quarter, which all but sealed the game. There was about 5 minutes left, and you knew at that point Syracuse was going to win. There was no shot at a comeback for Clemson. And also third and fourth down stops. Clemson was 3 of 13 on third down, and they also went 1 for 5 on fourth down. This Syracuse defense is young. It's getting better. It's got some talent. Antoine Delorier, Demetrius Samuel has had a great start as a true freshman over as a corner. I mean, he might be all ACC this year. He's having a fantastic season to begin. But this is not 2017 Alabama defense. Syracuse's defense, their job against Duke this game, and you can honestly apply this to almost any game they play this season. Their job is to capitalize on moments, make big plays when you need to make big plays, and get off the field when you need to get off the field. That's what they did against Clemson. That's to some extent what they did against UConn as well. They're not going to stop this Duke offense. But Syracuse can be opportunistic in this game. Let's talk about Duke for a little bit. They've turned the ball over at times to start this season. They've played 4 games. Darian Mensah, he's got 2 interceptions in 4 games. That's not bad at all. But Duke as a team has fumbled 8 times. They have fumbled 8 times in 4 games. That's 2 a game. They've lost 5 of those fumbles. So to recap, in 4 games, Duke has turned the ball over 7 times. But if not for a few breaks, in recovering some fumbles, they could have turned the ball over 10 times in 4 games. Now, to be fair to Duke, not to misrepresent everything, it's not like each of these first 4 games they've turned the ball over once or twice. 5 of those turnovers came in 1 game against Illinois, and they did not commit a single turnover against NC State. But the overall point, to tie it up all together, is this. I think it would be unfair to ask this Syracuse defense to really stifle the Duke offense, even though that would be terrific. But if and when Duke fumbles or Darian Mensah throws a ball up for grabs, Syracuse has to be there to take advantage, capitalize on the big moments. You can let up yards all you want, But at the end of the day, it's about how many points you allow, not how many yards you allow, which determines the outcome of a game. So that's what I am asking for this Syracuse defense. Take advantage of moments to upset the Duke Blue Devils. Now, as far as the remainder of this show, first, a little announcement for you all here on Locked On Syracuse. On a personal note, I'm excited to say that I have accepted a social media behind the scenes role with Locked On in general. This allows me to continue with the Locked On Podcast Network and, of course, continue with the Locked On Syracuse podcast, hosting and producing the show. What this means for Locked On Syracuse specifically is that now we're going to be a little bit more active on social media. So I'm going to link the TikTok account in the comment section below. It'll be pinned right there. But for those who are maybe listening right now, the TikTok, bear with me here because there's actually two of them if you search Locked On Syracuse. It is Locked On _Syracuse. That is the official TikTok account here on Locked On Syracuse. Please feel free to like and follow that account on TikTok. Also, we're on Instagram, Locked On Syracuse. And of course, thank you all for the amazing support here on Locked On Syracuse. Now, as far as what's coming up on the podcast here in the near future, like more episodes, the next podcast, I don't exactly have a time for when it'll be released, but the next podcast will be a crossover edition with the host of Locked On Duke Blue Devils, JJ Jackson. I will make an announcement on YouTube and on Twitter at LO_Syracuse. So stay tuned for when that episode is released. Either it's going to be later tonight. So if you're watching this on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern when it's premiering, maybe it'll be 8 p.m. I don't know exactly. Point being is that I will make the announcement. It'll be up at some point in the next 24 hours. Okay. Then on Friday, we got Poll Friday. Expectations for Rickie Collins for the rest of the 2025 season. All that and more coming up on Locked On Syracuse here in the near future. It's another big moment here on Locked On. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside two-time AP Coach of the Year, Derry Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and Locked On's local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season only on Fire TV. And folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoyed the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse. I will see you all again soon.